Good morning, everybody. I'm Susan Bocamazzo. I'm the publisher here at Lawyers Weekly. I want to thank you for joining us for today's program on cybersecurity risk on this snowy Tuesday. The risks of cybersecurity are continuously evolving, and businesses and law firms report that these are some of their biggest concerns. Our panel today is going to discuss a range of issues, including how to counter threats like ransomware, phishing, and malware, what best practices are, and take a look at privacy issues. This morning's presentation is being recorded, and you'll all receive a copy of that recording along with the accompanying slide deck by email later this week. I'd first like to thank the sponsors of today's program, Secure Future Tech Solutions and McLean Middleton. Our panelists will be taking questions. To ask a question, you can look for the Q&A bubble in the control panel at the bottom of the screen, and you can enter a question through that window at any time during the program. Now let's meet our panelists. Cameron Schilling is the chair of McLean Middleton's Cybersecurity and Privacy Group. He has developed a depth and breadth of experience in privacy and data security, and his resume includes managing numerous data security audits, preparing and implementing written security policies, training executives, managers, and employees in data security, auditing and preparing and implementing data security agreements with vendors and business associates, addressing a wide variety of day-to-day security issues, and investigating and remediating many security breaches. Eric Shore is the founder of Secure Future Tech Solutions, an IT company specializing in servicing the small to mid-sized business community throughout New England. He has extensive knowledge and experience in network security, cybersecurity, disaster recovery, proactive network monitoring and maintenance, and network video solutions. Eric and his team specialize in servicing law firms, property management companies, nonprofit agencies, and more. He's a national speaker on the many cybersecurity threats plaguing the small business community and the best practices to protect data. Cam and Eric, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
So Eric, I'm going to turn things over to you. If we could have the next slide,
Thank you
please.
so much. And I appreciate all of you joining us today on this snow day. So this, I think, is a great way to spend an hour. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, one of our areas of expertise is we work with a lot of law firms, particularly small law firms, and you guys are targets. Hackers know this, and they know that hackers know that you're dealing with transactions often involving large amounts of money, particularly if you practice real estate law or commercial law, you're moving a lot of money around. And also hackers know that you are dealing with highly sensitive information and valuable information. And this is really important to know because hackers will use that information if they can steal it to blackmail you. Another thing that hackers are very well aware of is that you all have very trusted relationships with your clients. And hackers can take advantage of that. If I'm a hacker and I can compromise your email, I can possibly send out emails that look like they're coming from you to all of your clients. So they really, target that. And you are heavily reliant on email. I mean, that is something, we're all using email, but in particular, attorneys are sending a lot of contracts back and forth, a lot of emails back and forth. And quite often, you have very limited email security and cybersecurity defenses. And then finally, nobody wants to, have this hit the press or tell their clients that there was a compromise or whatever, and hackers can use that knowledge to blackmail you and your firm.
And let me just add on to what Eric said, because everything he said was exactly correct. A lot of firms make the mistake of thinking that the valuable information they have are social security numbers or bank account numbers or financial information. But the hack of today is not about that information as much as it is about the broader sense of personal information that makes up a person's identity. And as lawyers, we have even a higher duty than businesses do because we have ethical responsibilities that require us to take care of not just PII, but the entire client file. We also have ethical responsibilities to notify that are heightened. And so for us as lawyers, this problem is just even more acute than the average business, as Eric explained.
Next slide, please. Now this here is a little snapshot. So the FBI publishes a report called the IC3. It's the Internet Crime Report. And it's a really great report. You can actually go and look for yourself if you like at ic3.gov. But I wanted to give you a couple of stats, really very chilling stats. So Massachusetts had 9,174 victims last year. The new report isn't quite out yet, but it'll be coming in the next couple of months, with a value stolen of over $150 million right from Massachusetts. And little old Rhode Island had 1,205 victims of internet crime with over $11 million in losses. So that is a tremendous amount of losses overall in this country. It amounts to billions and billions of dollars every year that's being stolen, not only from law firms, but other businesses as well. Next slide, please. So this is also pulled from the IC3 report. And what I want you to get out of this particular report is what is the most common attack. And I'm sure Cam can vouch for this as well. But we see by far about 90% of the attacks that we're dealing with that have been successful is coming through email and phishing attacks. As you could see, it tops the list. There was over 300,000 phishing victims last year across this country, which was very, very significant. And then there's all kinds of other frauds as well. But phishing is definitely the most prevalent attack that's out there. Has that been your experience as well, Cam?
Absolutely. And since the beginning of 2003, I've handled over 100 compromises, and less than 5% have been anything other than either phishing on email or on text message. So this is the #1 by far threat going.
Yeah, the text message thing has been something that I've seen an increase as well. Even some hackers targeted my own office and text messaged my assistant's cell phone, which I still don't know how they got her number, but anyway. Next message, please.
I wish I could keep my cell number private. It seems to be impossible.
Yeah, I think it's impossible these days. Fortunately, my assistant is very well trained and immediately alerted me to the situation, and we were able to take care of that. But so essentially what phishing is, it's a form of social engineering, which is a deception, essentially. Hackers use deception. They don't necessarily have to be amazingly technical people to be able to scam you. They trick you. They send you emails that either look like they're coming from you, they're actually coming from you if they're able to compromise your email, and they want you to give up information or click on a link. A lot of times they're looking for email access, to Office 365, so they can send you emails as well. They can even pretend to be a banker or someone as well too. That is probably one of the most common ways that hackers are able to compromise others, because if I'm a hacker and I can get into, let's say, my email, now I can email all my employees, I can email all my clients directly from my inbox. So that's a very, and that's why 95% of the attacks are coming from phishing. All right, next slide, please. All right, now malware versus ransomware. We throw a lot of terms out there. Essentially, malware is malicious code that can do any number of things, that can infect your computer, steal information, give access, backdoor access into your computers as well. And what ransomware is, it's a type of malware, but ransomware is designed to essentially blackmail you. They'll encrypt all your files, which means your files will be scrambled, so you do not have access to the files anymore. And this is something that's very, very prevalent. I'm seeing more blackmail these days versus just outright locking you out of your files. A lot of hackers today are stealing your data. It's called exfiltrating the data, and then using it to blackmail you and then your clients as well. That's really important to know. But one of the best things that you can do to protect yourself from ransomware, if you do get locked out of your systems, is to have a proper backup system. And you have to have redundancy built in. You cannot just have that USB drive sitting on top of your computer and thinking you're protected. Because guess what? Hackers look for backups, and that is the first thing that they will wipe out before they encrypt your files. So they target backups. So you want to have redundancy built in. You want to have a cloud backup that's encrypted, which means the hackers cannot easily get into that system. And you want to have a cloud backup system that also keeps multiple revisions. So if the latest revision of that backup is compromised, you can go back to previous backups to restore them. And that, I think, is really important to help you avoid paying the ransom. Has that been your experience as well, Cam?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And that was a great summary of kind of how a good backup system is created. I want to add one thing to what Eric said. So what Eric said is exactly right. The name of the game on ransomware now is not just encrypting you. In fact, sometimes the attackers won't even encrypt you. They'll just take some cross section of your data and let you know you have it, that they have it. So in addition to backup mechanisms, we really are looking for ways in which to encrypt data at rest for law firms, so that if the hackers take your data, it's encrypted and they can't get at it. And that's really the best last defense. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but that generally has to do a lot with how you store your data, where it's stored, whether it's in a server environment versus a cloud. Clouds can be very useful for that purpose. So we're really moving law firms more and more to encryption of data at rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Encryption is an important component. There's no doubt about that. All right, Cam, why don't you take it away on the next set of slides?
Sure. So I just want to, before I go, thank Susan and Mass Lawyers Weekly for this opportunity to talk to you. And I want to kind of highlight what the goal of this presentation is for Eric and I. And the goal is, we have two goals. First of all, we want to tell you what the critical safeguards are. And our hope is to start to get you thinking, look, how many of these things do I have? Do I really know whether or not my firm has them? How good am I on the Cam and Eric, test of these most critical things? And we're going to talk to you about, not blocking and tackling, not your basic things, but the things that are necessary to prevent you from being a victim of an attack today. So that's our number one goal. Get you to start thinking about, really how secure am I? The number two goal is, at the end of this, we hope that you realize you can do this and how you go about doing this. One of the biggest obstacles I think most businesses face, law firms, professional service firms, is that they know that cybersecurity is critical. They may even know what the issues are, but they have no idea about how to change the way they do business. And at the end of the presentation, we want you to go away taking that away. So Matt, go ahead and advance to the next slide. Eric and I are going to talk to you about these critical safeguards, but they all go more or less to safeguard 4 points of entry. These are 4 places where threat actors come in. And this is not to say there aren't others. Of course, there's USB drives and stuff like that. But these are the 4 primary ones: laptops, desktops, and other things that exist outside your firewall. They're called endpoints because they are the end of the points, or they're also points of entry, either into the laptop itself or into the network. We're going to talk about mobile devices because obviously they are also endpoints or entry points, and they typically are used to access a lot of email, as well as sometimes electronic documents. We can't forget about clouds because we all store huge amounts of data in clouds, and we need to make sure that the data that we put in clouds is equally as secure as it would be if it were on a server network. And the last piece is the network equipment we have and what's designed to protect that. So everything that Eric and I are going to go through now is pretty much designed to talk about the safeguards to prevent threat actors from getting into one of these 4 points of entry. All right,
I just want to chime in really quick about the cloud. And I hear this misconception quite often because a lot of firms that I deal with have practice management systems in the cloud, and they say, isn't the cloud provider giving us security? We don't really have to worry about our computers so much. And that is not the case at all. You have to protect everything always into the cloud as well.
Right. And a lot of cloud providers will give you the mechanisms to install good security features. Not everybody, but a lot of them will. But it's still up to us as as the clients of them to make sure that our systems, that our instance of the cloud environment is appropriately configured.
So one of the things that's really important to make sure that all of your endpoints or computers or whatever device that you use to access your systems is protected is called the virtual private network. And that ensures that devices that are outside your firm's firewall can connect through a secure and encrypted connection. The days of just opening up a port through your firewall and allowing somebody remote desktop in are long gone. That is so risky. We cannot do that.
We won't ask for a raise of hands for people who still do that.
Oh, no, please. If you have that situation, let us know. We can talk you through it. But it should be implemented on everything. You know, you cannot have a device accessing your firm's data that is not protected by a VPN because it can mitigate the risks from insecure networks and Wi-Fi to make sure that that connection cannot be easily compromised. You know, nothing is 100%, but when you're using a VPN to access your systems, that is a secure connection. But it's not good enough to have just a username and password, by the way, to access it. You also want to set up something that's called multi-factor authentication, or you might have heard it called two-factor authentication. To provide an additional step. So not only do you use your username and password to get in, but you also have an authenticator app on your phone, which gives you a rolling code that changes every 60 seconds. So that's the additional step. And if hackers don't have that additional step or your phone, they are not able to easily get into your system. So I think that's really important to make sure that VPN is definitely something that your firm is using, particularly if you're working from home as well. Home computers are quite often underprotected, and that's something that you need to make sure that you implement.
So two additional things on VPNs. If you think of a VPN as bringing these devices that are outside your network inside of your firewall, that's what we're trying to do. Get people to come inside your firewall and to do it automatically. So as soon as that laptop hits an internet or broadband connection, they're automatically inside your network. The second thing I want to say is, so a lot of firms, small and medium-sized firms, are completely cloud-based. They don't have a network. That doesn't mean you don't need a VPN, because you still want to pull those devices behind the firewall. And so there are cloud VPNs, and you can run it right out of Azure if you're a Microsoft Office 365 user. All right, Matt, I think you can probably go to the next slide. I'm doing this one, right, Eric?
You're up next. All
awesome. Right. So mobile device management is the way we solve bring your own device issues. So we have to secure the data that our employees use on their personal devices. Typically that's a cell phone or a tablet. Hopefully we're not letting employees use personal laptops. That should be a big no-no. But it gives us the ability to roll out email and sometimes electronic documents to mobile phones. And the data gets containerized in a mobile app called a mobile device management application, or MDM. And so if there's a lost or stolen device, it gives us the ability to lock that container so that a thief can't get access to it. It also gives us the ability to make sure that the employee's phone is appropriately secure, typically with a biometric or a password. And by doing that, the operating systems of the mobile devices will automatically encrypt the drive. So if the phone is lost, the data can't be recovered. So, you know, and a lot of people, I think that cybersecurity is expensive. It's going to be really expensive. I can't afford this. These two things that we just talked about, VPN and MDM, these are often contained in the programs you already use. So for instance, if you're an Office 365 user or a Google Suite user, both have MDMs that can be rolled out generally without additional cost. Sometimes you want to go up a license level to get a better MDM. But for the most part, these are built into the applications you may already have. They just need to be appropriately configured and deployed to users.
Yeah, right. You definitely want to leverage that. And just a quick story. So we deploy MDM for our clients, and one of our clients left his mobile device on top of his car and drove off. And we were able to actually track the phone to the side of the road and we recovered it for him. So that's another important component of MDM is tracking. So if you do lose something, you can get it back.
For sure. And when we talk about deploying MDM to laptops, which is doable now, particularly if you're a Microsoft user, there's a MDM called Intune, gives fantastic functionality and access to the laptop. But one of those things is finding these devices. This is one of them. All right, Matt, you can advance. Eric, is this me or you?
I think this is you, Cam.
All right, MFA. So anybody who's tried to get insurance, cyber insurance, knows that you don't get it unless you have multi-factor authentication. All the carriers are asking
100%.
for this. But the key is not just, can you say, yes, I have MFA? The question really is, what can you say you have MFA on? And is it truly deployed well? So, of course, it is important to have multi-factor authentication deployed to our email system. But it's also critical to have it deployed on the VPN or on the network when we're logging in, or on clouds when we're going, because we keep so much data in clouds, and many of these clouds have MFA built in, some of them do not. So there's a couple of different ways to do MFA. As Eric described, you can do it with a token, like a little fob that we used to get, or on a phone. There's MFA apps like Google Authenticator or Duo. But that's not the only way to do MFA. You can actually do it by what's called certificating a device. So for the user doesn't even see it. But for instance, you can't get onto the email system or onto the network unless it's a device that we know. That's what's called certificating. And there are other ways to do MFA, including single sign-on applications that make it easier for users just to sign on once, multi-factor authenticate once, and then there's access to a lot of different apps. And that works really well with clouds. Last thing I'll say is, can't tell you how many times I've had clients in the last year say they have an email compromise, but they don't understand because they have MFA on their email systems. And it's really important to check there are no backdoors. Microsoft, Google, and everybody in the last 3 years left a huge backdoor open for older applications that don't support MFA, and that backdoor has to be closed, because if it's not closed, really all you're doing is MFA with your employees, but the hackers can't just come in the backdoor. So it's really important to have someone with expertise make sure that your MFA is really truly properly deployed.
I think MFA is one of the single most important things to make sure that you deploy to protect yourself. And the other thing I just very quickly wanted to mention was, not only should it be on your work apps, but on your personal lives as well. Banking, social media, shopping sites. Hackers are going after all of these things, and you can roll out MFA to pretty much everything at this point.
Great point.
All right, next slide, please. So another critical component is making sure that you have robust passwords. The days of using your dog's name or your birth date or whatever, please don't do that. I've even come across firms that, because they wanted to make it easy for everybody to get into each other's computers if somebody was out, the password was password. So you don't have to admit it, but if that's you, can you please take care of changing that? So you don't want to rely on simple passwords anymore. They need to be long characters of at least 16 characters, or phrases. You could put together phrases to make it easy for you as well. I think that's something that also too, it's really important to make sure that you have unique passwords for each site. Now you may be thinking, oh my goodness, I have 500 different sites that I log into. How can I possibly keep track of that? Well, you can use a password manager program. There's some good ones out there. Nothing is 100% or perfect, but I think it's a necessary evil to have that. I use Dashlane. I think Dashlane is a good product. There are some other ones out there that have been compromised, which I might stay away from. But that is something where you can set a master password that you share nowhere. And then you can let the password manager create random passwords for you. I think that is something that's kind of critical to make sure that you're not reusing passwords, because if you do, hackers are very smart. So let's say you're a third-party website, I don't know, whatever website it is gets compromised. and you use your email address as the account name and the password, and then hackers get a hold of that, they will immediately try to log into your email system using those credentials. So if you're reusing everything, it could be a problem. The other thing too is that you should be aware of that there is a big dark web out there, and the dark web is a black market that hackers use to buy and sell all kinds of things, but most importantly, your information, passwords, social security numbers, credit cards. So you want to get a dark web monitoring service to make sure that you're aware if your information shows up on the dark web. I think that's critical. And then finally, there are firm-wide, password management systems that you can use to facilitate passwords and single sign-on, so everything is controlled from one location. So if somebody leaves or somebody gets compromised, you can very quickly lock them out of all systems and then change the password. Do you have anything else to add on this this one, Cam?
Yeah, there's two pieces of good news here for folks. One is if you can get your passwords long like the 16 characters, you don't have to change them. I haven't changed my password in over 2 years, if not over 3 years. And as long as you have somebody monitoring the dark web to make sure your password hasn't been hacked, you don't have to change it. And that's good news for folks. The other good news is these SSO application, single sign-on and password managers. They should be firm managed. You should have control of them as the firm, but then it makes offboarding employees easier and onboarding because you know all the places they have access. You have administrator control, you have central control over it, and that's good news. It makes things a lot easier. Makes a hard problem a lot easier.
It sure does. We set up our clients with Microsoft single sign-on, and that can be used to authenticate, which means allow access into a variety of other systems, including Dropbox and other systems. Almost everyone supports Microsoft. So that's definitely something that you want to take into account. All right, next slide, please. All right, now firewalls. Now there's a couple of different firewalls that you need to be aware of, but essentially a firewall is a barrier or a wall that keeps the hackers out of your systems without permission. So there's something that's called a physical firewall, right? That's something that gets put in so that your internet, so your network doesn't have direct internet access into your network, so it provides that barrier. And what's really important is when you put one of these firewalls in, it's not a device that you just set it and forget it, right? You don't just stick it in that closet somewhere, or I've even seen them under desks or somewhere, but you want to make sure that someone, your managed services provider, is actively managing that firewall. So that they can prevent an attack. And also there are a bunch of additional security features that run out of a hardware-based firewall: intrusion prevention, gateway antivirus. There's a bunch of different services that are running in there. And also too, it's something that, and we'll talk about this in a second, but it keeps logs of everything that's coming and going. So that's the first piece. That's the hardware firewall. But then there's also another really important component as well, because there's a software firewall. So that is a firewall that runs on your endpoint. So Windows machines have firewalls that you can turn on. Mac OS, if you're a Mac shop or firm, you can turn on the firewalls as well too. So it's equally important to make sure that even though you have a hardware firewall, you also turn the software firewall on as well, particularly if you have a laptop, because once that laptop leaves the firm's office, if you go to a coffee shop or somewhere else, you're not protected by that hardware firewall anymore. So that is equally important to make sure that your software firewall is on at all times as well. And then the big thing is what that firewall is doing, particularly the hardware firewall, is keeping a log of everything. And so if there is a breach, you want to make sure that you have access to those logs and that they're being saved somewhere. And that's something that a lot of firewalls, they go unmonitored and no one is actually watching the logs. But if there's a breach, and Cam, I'm sure you can talk about this a little bit more in detail. If there's a breach, you definitely want to have logs in place. And so Cam, can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I'll talk about that and I'll answer the question that came up in the Q&A.
Oh, wonderful.
So log files exist not just on firewalls, but in operating systems and a lot of other applications. And you would never see a log file. You wouldn't look at it. Technologists and forensics people do. They recover the log files to see who got access from where. We track when threat actors get in by virtue of where they come in from, their IP address and their activity, what they touch. And so if we have a compromise, the name of the game of today is not avoiding compromises, they happen, but rather keep them quick. Quick and small. So keep them small, detect them quick. And log files tell us where the threat actors have gone. If you don't have the appropriately configured log files, you don't know what's been exposed, and what could have been a small breach might end up being a big one just because you can't tell what was compromised. The question was, how do you do dark web scanning? The answer is you don't, even I don't. The dark web is a place where you have to have a special browser to get on, and all firewalls would not let you go to the dark web. So you hire a managed service provider. Typically, this can be included in a package of info security services from an MSP to do dark web scanning. And typically it's done, depending on what kind of business you are, it's either done continuously or every month or every quarter. I wouldn't want it done less than every quarter, but it's done by an MSP.
I could definitely speak to that since you do have an MSP sitting right here in front of you. So that is absolutely something that you want to talk to your MSP about. That is a service that we offer to all of our clients. It's just included. And that's something that's actively scanning on a regular basis. So as soon as there's an alert based on your domain and your IP addresses, that's something that comes up and you can take action. And speed is the key here. Whenever there is any kind of cybersecurity incident or there's information about your firm on the dark web, you want to get to it immediately. And that's why dark web scanning is so important.
Yep. All right, Matt, next slide. All right, so we've already talked about a number of things that you need to do to configure your endpoints properly, your laptops and desktops. Eric talked about local firewalls, the software firewalls that need to be activated. And really the purpose of doing this is because people make mistakes. No matter how much you train people, they're going to make mistakes. Maybe I haven't made a mistake in the last couple of years, but no one is not prone to it. And so you need to add technological backstops. And configuring your endpoints properly is important because that's usually where people operate. That's where they make mistakes. So a couple of things that are absolutely necessary is encryption of the drives. So, and this is like not a question of whether or not you can do it. The mass regs are pretty clear on this. You have to encrypt the drives of laptops so that if it's lost, the data just can't be stolen. Also, one critical component, and I always get heartburn from clients when I say this, you cannot allow users to be administrators on laptops. So what an administrator can do is download an executable file. That's what our IT folks do for us. If I'm a user on my laptop and I accidentally click on an email with a malicious link, or I go to a website. Now there's other backstops to protect me there too, which we're going to talk about. But if I do something accidentally, I don't have privileges to download an executable file because I'm not an administrator. And so it protects me from my own mistakes. And then the last thing is we talked about MDM. We can actually roll out MDM for laptops, which allows your IT provider to do things like monitor things that are happening on the laptop in real time, making sure that everything is configured properly. So this is really one of the more basic things. None of this stuff is a maybe. All of this stuff has to be done. Eric, you have other thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we see quite often and what many clients ask because it's inconvenient is that local administrator access, which it's not just laptops, by the way, it's everything. Users should not have local administrator rights on anything because if a hacker is able to compromise that machine, they can install whatever they want to. And then also too, they can use that access to move laterally around the network, which means once I get into one system, I can hop around to other systems. And if everyone is a local admin on their computers, they can easily move around. So that is something that's absolutely 100% critical, that you lock that down. And then if you do need something, well, they just have to ask permission for it, and then your MSP or an admin in the office can take care of setting that up.
All right, Matt, you can advance. All right, so this slide is probably the most targeted protection against phishing. So of course, we want to train people how to recognize a phishing email, what to do if they see it, send it, maybe we have a phish button that they can click on, or they send it to the IT group. But this is the technological backstop to prevent phishing. So, and this typically comes as a suite of products. It might come along with your Office 365. You might put a plug into Office 365 that does this kind of in a more robust way. This comes in this suite of products. So first of all, you'll get filtering. So you want to filter out spam. You want your product to look for misidentifiers. So an email that says it comes from Cam Schilling, but if you look behind the name, it has nothing to do with my email address. So there's lots of kind of filters that can take off the top level of stuff that's potentially malicious, but stuff will get through. And so there's these applications have a sandboxing feature. So whenever a user launches an attachment from an email or clicks on a link, it takes that to the sandbox, runs it in a safe environment, and identifies malware. This is, again, this is not a maybe. This is something you have to have on your email system. This is the technological backstop for phishing. And then the last piece, and this is particularly important for law firms because we push around a lot of sensitive information, and we need to have filters out on outgoing messages that prevent us from sending sensitive information in email. This is a backstop to prevent against accident. So
this is one of the things that's absolutely critical to have, that sandboxing feature. There are many different services that offer it. One of the partners that we have that we deploy is called Proofpoint, and it rewrites every single link inside of an email that you receive, and then when you click on it, it goes to their sandbox for testing, and that's a very powerful feature because you know what, we're relying on human beings and we do make mistakes. But with that being said, I think the training component is actually essential as well. And there are other products out there that can do automated training, KnowBe4, and there's a few other ones as well that we use. And we can actually send test phishing emails to see who is prone to clicking. And then when you identify the people within your firm that are a little bit too clicky, then you can send them video training links to reinforce the message. So I think that it's really important to make sure that everyone is getting this training.
Yeah, and also that what Eric was talking about is testing is important as well, because sometimes some people are just untrainable. You can't do anything, and so sometimes you have to implement additional safeguards for them. Sometimes they know that they're getting it, and sometimes they don't. But you have to identify your problem children. Because some people are just untrainable. All right, Matt, you can go ahead.
Absolutely. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is something that's called advanced threat detection and prevention. That sounds kind of fancy, but essentially what it is, it's a newer generation of antivirus on steroids. Because basic antivirus that you used to use, or maybe you're just using the free one that comes with built into Windows Defender, it's really not enough to prevent sophisticated attacks. And that's something that there are newer systems out there today that are designed to detect and stop ransomware. They use machine learning and artificial intelligence to identify not necessarily what the threat is, but what the behaviors are. It's really important to know that the way that old antivirus used to work, they had to identify what the virus was, write what's called a signature file, which then they can download to your computer. And all of that takes time. And unfortunately, there's something out there that's called a 0-day threat. That means it's a brand new threat that nobody has seen before, and that just tears through traditional antivirus. So the newer systems out there, there's CrowdStrike, there's SentinelOne, there's a variety of different platforms out there that go a long way toward detecting these threats and stopping them. And you don't necessarily want to have just one antivirus system in place. You want to have something what's called a layered approach, and to make it more complicated for hackers to get through. Because today, hackers, it's big business today. Hackers are business people. They're looking to get your money. That's essentially what they're doing. And if they have to spend additional time trying to compromise your firm because you have multiple layers of defense, they may move on to someone else. That's called low-hanging fruit. You know, somebody that's maybe using the traditional McAfee or an older system, or maybe they don't have antivirus at all. And so that's easy for them to target it. But that is something that I think is really critical. And Cam, I'm curious to know, like in some of the breaches that have happened, have they been using some of the newer stuff, or were they relying on more traditional things?
It's almost always that there was a lack of advanced threat protection. So what Eric talked about with layering is critical. It isn't that Microsoft Defender isn't good. It is. But everything has cracks. And so when you add 2 layers to this, it's very difficult to find cracks, particularly when one of those layers is looking for this blacklist that Eric talked about, and another layer is looking for activity. It's tough to get through those 2 layers. And the other thing I'd add is, so when I've seen incidences with businesses that have deployed one of these AI features. So the big one is CrowdStrike. Darktrace is another one. Sophos's Intercept X is kind of another one. So, but when I've seen incidences with businesses that have had one of these systems, it's almost always because it hasn't been deployed to endpoints. And so the endpoint gets attacked, or the endpoint becomes a point of attack, and then it isn't caught until it gets inside the network where they have one of these AI features. So it's really critical to get these pushed out to endpoints, because again, quick and small. Catch it quick, keep it small. A laptop is small, and it gets caught quickly when it's on that device.
I think that's a really important point too, because the areas where the situations where I've seen firms get compromised is it has not been deployed to everything, or they had an older machine. You know, if anyone is still using Windows 7 out there, please stop. Okay, Windows 10 or Windows 11 is in support, but it's always an older machine that was compromised and not capable of running the latest security software.
Right.
So that's a very good point that you brought up. All right, next slide, please. Now, backup and failover redundancy is really important for you to take into account. Because if there is a situation, you really need to have a disaster and backup recovery plan. I think it's important to not try to come up with a plan when there's an incident. So you really need to think about what your critical systems are: email, data, financial systems, where are they located, and make sure that you have secure backups that can be restored quickly and that are also kept off-site, either via cloud, or maybe it's completely disconnected, but you have access to it as well. The backup has to be, encrypted. That's critical, because hackers do look for backups. So if you have a backup and your only backup is connected to that server and it sits in the same room or whatever, that could be really important. One of the things that I really love is leveraging cloud solutions. I think there's a lot of redundancy that's built in. When you have, most of my clients today, they're all using Microsoft Office 365, which Microsoft has a tremendous amount of resources, both in redundancy, data centers, security. But 10 years ago, I still had many firms using on-premise email servers. And so that would be a weak link. If you have on-premise servers, I think it's a bigger discussion, but you want to start looking at, can I deploy these to the cloud? what's the next step. There's a lot of great, cloud apps that are out there today that law firms are using as well. So this is, I think, a really critical component. What do you think about that, Cam?
Yeah, so I have two thoughts. First, I actually want to give you the anatomy of a successful ransomware incident. So let's assume for some reason a attacker got through, you've got all these defenses up, and somehow they got through and they encrypt your network. You still have a network. The optimal solution is you immediately go to a failover system. It's usually cloud-based. It's going to have your email system. It's going to have your billing system. A lot of this stuff, as Eric said, might be housed in SaaS or clouds already. It's failover. You don't lose more than a couple of steps between 7 and 8 in the morning. And so there's really zero downtime from an external perspective. And then your backup with your backup, you've restored with your backups within a day or two. That is the successful trajectory for a bad ransomware attack of today.
And it's not just ransomware attacks, by the way, too. It could also be, let's say you do have on-premise servers and you have a failure. The other day, we had a heating and air conditioning system for a server room fail, and everything unfortunately cooked in that server room. We were able to go to the cloud backup and get them up and running off of the cloud very quickly. So that's the kind of thing. It's called the backup and disaster recovery system. So that's something that you should ask your MSP about. If you have just a file-based system, which means it's just backing up your files and not the entire image of the server, you really want to think about making that investment and moving forward. All right.
I've forgotten about environmental disasters.
Oh,
It's been so long since what happened.
They're still happening. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Particularly in the summer.
All right, Matt.
Next slide. All right.
All right. So a couple of things we can't forget. When we secure ourselves, we can't forget that we have to make sure that the people whom we give information are equally secure, our vendors. And that means you need to triage who you're giving information to. We're going to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about a risk assessment. You need to put them in risk categories, figure out, who's got a lot of sensitive information, who's got some, who's not particularly risky. Do due diligence that's different depending on how risky the vendor is and how much information they have, and then get them in appropriate cybersecurity agreements. So that's a critical aspect, which I guess is called vendor management. Typically, it's not necessarily the first thing companies or law firms address, but it is probably one of the more critical ones to address early on. And the other piece is cyber insurance. So it is bad to have a ransomware event or an encryption or event or a malware event. It's bad to lose a financial transaction, but it's even worse if you have no insurance backup for it. And I can't tell you how many incidents in the last several years clients say, yep, I have cyber insurance and, I work with my broker on it, and you go and you look and it's just not the right insurance, or the coverage limits are paltry, or there's coverage for some things, but not others. And in particular, this is true with respect to cybercrime, because a typical policy will only protect against loss of information. A firm needs to have a cybercrime policy to cover for financial fraud. So particularly in the last several years, as the insurance world has been turned upside down, we focus more and more on making sure that law firms have the right cyber insurance. All right, next.
I think that's
slide.
a critical discussion to have, and one that, with my ongoing meetings with my clients, I am getting information. I think it's really critical. The cyber insurance market is becoming tougher. There are questionnaires coming out now, very long questionnaires asking, do you have MFA? Do you have next generation antivirus and other things as well? So it's definitely something that if your firm doesn't have, you need to get that.
All right, a quick note on financial crime. There's essentially two predominant ways where money gets stolen. The first way is this business email compromise or a phone compromise, where the threat actors are going to trick somebody into sending money to a fraudulent account. And the tricks almost always come by either, jumping into an email stream and giving the transferor an incorrect bank account, or bullying the transferor into transferring the assets. And there are a couple of different mechanisms to prevent this. I'll talk about them in a sec. The second way of stealing money is to get actual access into a financial account and then direct money to a fraudulent account. That can happen either by accessing like a bank account, or it can happen by accessing other financial resources, including payroll resources, where the names or bank account numbers of employees are changed, or a financial accounting application where a new payee is added, or payee information is changed. So these safeguards are designed to prevent these financial crimes. So on the misdirected transfer of a transaction to the wrong financial account, it's critical to train people. It really is critical. We still need training on how not to fall victim to this. And this is really not hard for the most part. We need to teach people that they never input a financial transaction using a bank account number that they've gotten over an email. You always call and verify. You call a number that you know. You talk to a person you know. This really is not a difficult scam to avoid, but people need to know when to recognize it and how to recognize it. For firms that are conducting lots of financial transactions, there's different ways to do it. There are portals that are being opened up so that the transferor logs in, sets up an account on one side, the transferor sets up the account on the other side. They all have their own credentials. No one ever asks for a bank account number. No one ever says how much is going to get transferred unless that goes through the portal. There's secure passwords, there's MFA. That's really the way to take the game out of the system. And actually, these portals have opened up for personal types of transactions, but they're less prevalent for commercial. So some of you use Venmo. That's a personal financial transaction portal. Wouldn't really be appropriate for business because there aren't enough safeguards, but the commercial ones are coming out. The other thing we need to do, particularly as firms, is allocate liability in agreements for financial loss. The way the law is developing is not to have clear rules on who bears the loss for liability, but we can fix that by allocating liability in agreements. And I won't talk for too long about how to secure your own bank accounts or financial accounts. This is a topic in and of itself. Suffice it to say, all of those accounts have to have MFA access. There has to be safeguards set up so that there's dual notification or dual authorization when a certain transaction is initiated. For instance, if I change a payee or I initiate a $10,000 transfer, someone else is going to get notice or someone else needs to authorize it. Those are dual notification and dual authorization functions. All right, Eric, anything to add before we kind of move on to the next piece?
I think the training piece is key, because I've seen law firms lose hundreds of thousands of dollars because they received an email from with wiring instructions. So the tip is call the verify. Don't ever send money out with instructions through email.
You'd think that the law was going to develop for with the rule that he who is hacked bears liability. I thought that was the way it was going to develop, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, before there wasn't this stuff. It hasn't. The rule of law is the person who is in the last best position to prevent bears liability, or it's allocated, which is not clear. It's never clear in these situations. And it's designed to put the person who is the transferee, the person who could have prevented the harm, to allocate some liability to them. You just don't want to ever be in that situation. It's a bad situation.
Agreed.
The money's gone. You can't get it back. All right. Great. So let's move on to the next piece, because so when we are designing this presentation, Eric and I talked, and look, we would be remiss if we wouldn't tell you what the crest of the wave is. And the crest of the wave is about privacy. In fact, it's not the crest. The wave has landed on our shores. Matt, you can go to the next piece. So the wave has landed by way of international laws, like GDPR in the European Union, PIPEDA in Canada. These laws all have little acronyms. But they land here because these laws apply to businesses that have information about residents of those locations. So when we do business in Europe or Canada, we become subject to these laws. California was the first state in the United States to enact this type of law, and again, it applies if you have information about residents. There are some thresholds, so it doesn't always apply to small businesses. But these laws are coming everywhere. Connecticut enacted one last year. Colorado, Virginia, Utah have them. New Hampshire has one in its Senate now, as does Maine, as does Massachusetts. I'm pretty confident the New Hampshire and Maine bills are going to pass. Don't know if the Mass one is going to pass. But it's coming at us. We can't avoid it. And also, people know about it. This is what they pay attention to. For some reason, they pay less attention to cybersecurity breaches than they do about whether or not you have their name and address and what their privacy rights are with respect to it. So people care. And unlike security laws, where we sort of worry more about sensitive information like bank account number and social security number and stuff like that, these privacy laws apply to any information that identifies a person or is identifiable to them. My name is a piece of personal information. My email address, where I work, what my job history is, what my employment history is, how much I make, all that sort of stuff. And these laws, they have 4 big buckets, 3 of which we need to care about acutely. First of all, they tell us that when we collect and use this information, we need to tell people about what we're getting and how we're going to use it. So as law firms, we need to start baking this into our engagement letters. We need to have privacy policies. That's notice, a privacy policy notice, that we can give to clients or make accessible on our websites. So we need to give notice. Second, we need to get consent when we use certain types of information. And as law firms, we use that type of information. It's sensitive personal information. So anything about a person's race, national origin, specific age, sexual identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, political affiliation, religious affiliation, genetics, biometrics. So it's all the sensitive stuff. And we get that stuff as law firms. Not for every file for sure, but we get it for some files. And so again, we need to make sure our processes for engagement letters and the like have the right consent language. And consent is an affirmative step. People actually you need to actually say, this is the information that we may get from you, and we are going to use it for the following 5 purposes. If you agree, sign on the dotted line. That's consent. Unlike notice, which is, here's our privacy policy. Read it if you'd like. Those are the first 2 major buckets, notice and consent. The third is privacy rights. So individuals have certain rights with respect to their information. Those rights include things like telling us not to sell or share it. Now, most law firms aren't going to do that, but it also includes things like limiting our use of it, correcting information if it's not accurate, access to, portability of their information. So if they want a copy of all of the personal information we have about them, they get it. So as law firms, we need to be ready to respond to this. Yes, of course, we need to have on our websites the page that allows individuals to exercise these privacy rights. But we need to be ready once they do. And being ready is not as easy as just saying, yes, I'll do it when the time comes. We need to have the back office processes in place to actually comply. All right, so that is a whirlwind tour on privacy. Eric, anything to add before we go on to the next piece?
I think you covered it, Cam.
All right, good. Covered it in privacy in 4.5 minutes. All right, so the last thing we want to do, we've got about 15 minutes left, and we're going to probably talk for, I don't know, 5 or 7 minutes on this next piece. But remember what I said up front, we've got 2 goals. The first goal is to give you a sense of as to what you need to know about these safeguards. That's what we've done so far. This next piece is to the next goal, which is helping you understand how to do it. So all of those things that Eric and I talked about early on, MFA and encryption and laptops and VPNs, those are mechanisms to provide you with security. The question is, how do you know what you need? And how do you go through doing it? Because whereas, I can do this from my law firm, although I don't do it anymore for myself. You probably feel like you're not going to be able to do this yourself. And you probably aren't. So the next piece is designed to kind of tell you how you go about doing this. So a risk management process is essentially a 5-step process. And this is not a linear process. We've laid this out linearly in 5 steps, but in the real world, it's not entirely how it happens. And the process of being cybersecurity or privacy compliant, it's not supposed to be a race where you cross the finish line. If I told you, you're going to, for the next 18 months or 2 years, do financial accounting, and then you're going to stop doing it, you'd say that doesn't make any sense. We can't run a business without doing financial accounting every day. And the same is true with cybersecurity. It becomes, if you do this the right way, this becomes a part of your operations, your business operations. So that, for instance, you may say, we need a new application to do financial affidavits for our family law practice, or we need a new application to do tax return processing. You ask yourself, what application do we want? What functionality does it have that we need? And you evaluate the alternatives. You look at it and you say, what's the price of it? Can we afford it? Does this fit within our budget? You look at it and you say, do we want this on our servers, or do we want it on a cloud? And you look at it and say, what are the cybersecurity pieces? How are we going to access it? What information are we going to put in it? What controls do they have? What agreement do we need with this vendor? So this just becomes a process of your daily operations. All right. So that said, the 5 steps are the first is the risk assessment. And this is probably the most critical step. Most everybody knows that Massachusetts has a law that requires a policy called a WISP, a Written Information Security Policy, but it's probably the least most important part of this process. Everybody can have a policy. Whether or not that policy is true and accurate is a different story. Whether or not you follow that policy, an entirely different story. What's the most important thing is that you look at your entire business in a comprehensive and detailed way and figure out what your risks are. For instance, do you have laptops? Are people allowed to be administrators? Or maybe that's not you. Maybe some of them are encrypted, maybe some are not. But the point is, you need to look through your entire business and find out what your risks are as a business. Not all businesses, of course, are the same. And then the output of that process is a report. And it's critically important that this report remain privileged. One of the first things that regulators ask for if you've had a breach, and they're going to go through an audit process, is give us all the work papers for your risk assessment. Now, hopefully you've had a risk assessment. If you haven't, that's a different problem. But it's critically important that you keep the report privileged. The report is a roadmap of all the things that you're not doing right now that you need to do. And it risk categorizes them. It gives you various alternatives to solve these problems. That report is not ever something you ever want to see the light of day. Step 2 is the fix it step. And what I'll say is step 1 typically goes relatively fast. It can be done from start to finish, in a matter of days, weeks, certainly not weeks of work, but it can be, finished in a matter of weeks. The fix it step, the remediation step, that typically can go a year, 2 years, 3 years. It actually implementing cybersecurity maturity requires a lot of change. It can be a budgetary issue. It can be a cultural issue. It can be a technology issue. And so, making your firm mature from a cybersecurity or privacy perspective is a multi-year endeavor. Now, of course, the process doesn't stop for that. We do vendor management along the way. We're going to put in place that policy and test and train all before, you've gotten to the end of year 3. But that's, and then once you're done with it, you turn around and you kind of do it again. At the end of 2 years, you're going to look back. You're going to look back at that report. You're going to try to see, what you got done, what you didn't get done, what's still important, what isn't as important because you might have changed systems or operations. And then you kind of turn around and do it again. And what I'll also, actually, I'm going to stop here because not only do I do a lot of this stuff, but Eric does a lot of it too. And before I kind of go to the next slide, I'm going to give him a chance to kind of talk about the top-down process.
I definitely want to hammer home the fact that it is an ongoing process and you're never done. This is something that you have to weave into the fabric of your firm. And I do a lot of risk assessments as well, Cam. And that is something that, it's not corrected overnight. But once you have the risk assessment and report, then you work toward and then you reevaluate. So it's just something that you have to be aware of. And then also the training as well. The workforce training, I think, is really critical. And you cannot do just one training and think you're done. This is something that on a quarterly basis, or maybe even more frequently, depending on your users, it needs to be ongoing.
Actually, I'm going to highlight that. I think after the risk assessment, the training is the second most important piece of this. A lot of companies will say, I'm cybersecurity mature. Look at my policies. I don't want to see your policies. I'm going to see how mature your workforce is. That tells me really, where you are as a company, because it's the people that make the mistakes for the most part. Policies don't make mistakes. All right, Matt, let's go to the next slide. This is the last thing we're going to talk about before we kind of open it up for questions. So the first step is risk assessment. We're not going to go through all the other steps, but I want to take you through the risk assessment step, because this is where I want you to come at the end of it and say, yep, I can do this. This is how we do it. So first of all, you've got to commit to doing it. It can be scary. You don't know what you're going into, but you got to commit to doing it. You got to commit the time to do it. You got to commit the resources to do it. And you got to commit culturally to do it. The process doesn't work if you don't want to get to the end of it, or if you're going to have people who are going to be obstructionists in the process. And we deal with that. Sometimes we have to work around folks that don't want to do this. The next thing you got to do is you got to get the right people on the job. And this is a 3-legged stool. The first leg is you, the business leaders, the business managers, and that's not just your IT infrastructure. That's, the managing partner, the key lawyers in the firm. Sometimes it's your secretarial staff or your paralegal staff. You got to gather that business team, because they're all going to be involved in this and they need to be bought into it. But they're all going to be involved in it. The second piece is someone like Eric's firm. This is an outside firm that's going to be your InfoSec specialist. That's going to help you not just identify areas of concern, but solutions. And I'm going to come back to what role that firm has as well. But the third piece is a cybersecurity lawyer. And there's a couple of things we add. Not just do we add privilege, but we add a huge amount of expertise on how to risk categorize things, where the solutions lie. A big piece of cybersecurity is not just about tech. It's not just about laptops or MFA. It's about your physical infrastructure, your building, your files, the physical security around your electronic infrastructure. It's about vendor management. So there are 3 pieces of cybersecurity that are written into the law: technical, physical, and administrative. And you can't forget the physical and the administrative. And I said I'd come back to one of the reasons why it's really important to pull in a firm like Eric's. It's because after you find all of these problems and gaps, you're going to need help to implement solutions. Even if you have an outside MSP, a lot of times the MSP might not be the one that implements your InfoSec solutions. So once you've gathered the team, you go through the information gathering. A big piece of that is interview. I can't tell you how many times we've interviewed the IT people. They say they know everything. You do four-hour interview with IT, and then you start talking to the business people with the IT folks in the room, and you start realizing, oh, they didn't know about that cloud, or they didn't know how users were using this database. And so it's critically important to really go through the whole business and figure out how information is gathered, where it's stored, how it's used. Also, there's a piece of this that a firm like Eric's will do, and that's technological diagnostics. So it's the granular stuff. We look for things like unpatched applications, crackable passwords. We do dark web scanning in this process, that type of stuff. And then the last piece is to get the report. It has to be manageable. It has to be usable. It has to be understandable to business folks, not just to IT people. And it has to give you a real path to success. Cybersecurity doesn't work if you get a list of 105 things that you don't know how to deal with, or that with no risk categorization, or with the no achievable path to success. So that's kind of the way the first step in the process works. And again, let me turn it over to Eric for the last couple of comments before we open it up for questions.
I think it's really important to note that you definitely want to partner with an experienced provider that has cybersecurity experience. I quite often come into a lot of firms that they've been working with their IT person or company for many years, but they lack the skill set, and they're not aware of a lot of the latest trends in cybersecurity. So that's a situation where we can come in, and we have many different scanning tools and things to help us conduct our assessments to look for those granular things out there, like passwords and holes and patches and all that other stuff. So you want to make sure that you're bringing someone in that has a good understanding of the process and what needs to happen, and also to help you identify what needs to be done first and move forward from there. Because I will go into any network and I will find things to do, but some are more important to tackle first versus some of the smaller things as well.
All right. So we have a couple of minutes left. You can submit questions to the Q&A piece. Just so we don't have dead air time, I want to give you an example of how this kind of shakes out. So suppose you're a shop that uses Office 365 for your email. Maybe you use it for your document storage, which is called OneDrive. Maybe you use it for your secure file sharing, which is called SharePoint. Maybe you use it to store some of your databases, like your billing database or something like that. That's called Azure. So when Eric and I are going to come in and we're going to look at a firm like this that uses Microsoft Office 365, we see, okay, you've got a system that you're using. How can we use that system to really advance you from a cybersecurity perspective? You've already got all the tools in place. We're going to look to implement multi-factor for access to Office 365. The Microsoft Defender is a really good inside Office 365 activity-based threat detection system. SharePoint is going to give you a great secure file transfer protocol. So a lot of firms, even before we come in and we do the risk assessment, when we ask basic questions like, are you using this system or that system? It becomes immediately apparent how we can help make you better really quickly with a relatively low spend. So Eric, you might have a comment on that. And if we have no questions, then I guess we'll say goodbye. But if you do have questions, just put them in the Q&A.
Yeah, there are a lot of tools that are available in the Office 365 and Microsoft environment that are available. And you're right, it's either it's included as part of your license, or it can be added on relatively inexpensively, including multi-factor authentication. There is a free version of it that's built into Office 365, but then there's also some additional versions that provide security features that, is something that you may want to deploy in your network.
Yep. So there's a question about thoughts on password managers. Eric had mentioned Dashlane. Dashlane is a good provider. There are others as well. I think what's most important about password managers from my perspective is, number one, they need to be firm owned and managed. So if employees are going to store passwords, we as the firm need to have, we need to have control over the password manager piece. And the second thing is, what you really need to do is find the right password manager for your firm. There's lots of commercially available ones out there, but there might also be ones that solve more issues. Like 1Pass, for example, is not just a password manager, but it's a single sign-on application, so that when I log on using MFA to 1Password, it's going to give me access to not just the one thing, but a lot of things from one portal. And so you really gotta look for what product is right for your firm, as opposed to just what's a good product.
I think that's a really important discussion, and like even Dropbox has added a password manager into their environment, and so there are different multiple options. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of Dashlane, and that's what we use and recommend.
All right, Eric, why don't you take this next question, which is, how do you secure mobile devices if your firm is BYOD?
So that's really a policy decision that you have to have at your firm to decide if that's allowable. People get funny about their own personal devices and requiring them to have management agents on their particular personal devices, but I think that has to come with part of the package. So I think that's something that either that or you provide a company-owned device that's fully managed. So that's really something that you can require. If you want to bring your own device, we have to have a management agent on it. That's what I would do. Otherwise, don't let them use it. I don't know how you feel about that, Cam.
Yeah, I'm more of a hard line. Look, if you want access to firm assets, email, or docs on your mobile phone, you download the MDM that we give you. And, this is a cultural issue. People think you're looking at, your big brother and you're looking at their personal stuff, and you're not. An MDM only containerizes firm information. A lot of times it's transparent. The user doesn't even see it necessarily. But it can be explained. Look, we don't even have access to your personal assets. All we containerize is email or this app or that app. And so you just got to get people over that cultural hump, or tell them, look, sorry, if you want access to your email, you're going to have to get it through our MDM.
Yeah, I agree that I think that's the right policy. I mean, people, there is the capabilities of tracking the device where it is and stuff, but I assure you, as an MSP that is managing a lot of these devices, we are not doing that unless the device is lost or stolen, and then we will track it.
Right.
So I want to thank Cam and Eric for presenting today.
Thank you
to McLean Middleton and Secure Future Tech Solutions for sponsoring, and urge our attendees, if you have questions that come up after this program ends, please don't hesitate to reach out to the two panelists. They have a lot of information to share, and I know they'd be happy to help. Thank
Thanks,
you
Susan.
all.
Thanks for having us today. Take care, everybody.